I moved into the apartment because it was cheap, recently renovated, and available immediately, which should have been a warning, but wasn't. The building was old, but the unit itself looked untouched by time. The walls were clean, the locks new, and every door inside the apartment closed smoothly without sticking. On the first night, I noticed there were 7 interior doors, despite the layout only accounting for 6 rooms. I assumed the extra door belonged to a sealed storage space and ignored it. At 2:11 a.m., I woke to the sound of a latch being tested from the inside of my apartment. Not violently, not rushed, but carefully, as if someone was checking which doors were still secured. I stayed in bed, listening as the sound moved from one room to another, stopping briefly at each door before continuing. When it reached the extra door at the end of the hallway, the sound stopped completely. The next morning, the extra door was open. Inside was not a room, but a narrow corridor extending farther than the apartment's dimensions allowed. The walls were unfinished concrete, marked with shallow impressions, shaped like hands pressed flat and dragged downward. At the far end of the corridor stood another door, identical to the ones in my apartment. I closed the door immediately and contacted the building manager, who insisted there was no such space on the floor plan and accused me of tampering with the unit. That night, I placed furniture against every door and stayed awake. At 2:11 a.m., the latch sounds began again, except this time they came from behind the extra door. The furniture blocking my bedroom door shifted slightly, not from impact, but from pressure applied. I called emergency services, but the call dropped repeatedly. When the extra door opened again, the corridor was shorter than before. The hand marks were closer to the entrance. From inside the corridor came a slow, deliberate sound, like weight being applied and released against the walls in steady intervals. I left the apartment at sunrise without packing and never returned. A month later, I searched public records and discovered that every tenant before me had vacated suddenly, each filing a complaint about an extra door that appeared after midnight. The unit was listed again 2 weeks later as newly renovated. The photos showed 6 doors now. I was hiking alone through a restricted forest trail, used mainly by rangers and survey teams. The route was marked, the weather stable, and my radio tuned to the emergency frequency required for the area. Around mid-afternoon, the radio crackled to life with a calm voice asking for a position check. The voice used my name. I responded immediately, assuming it was a ranger accessing my registration data. The voice acknowledged and told me to stay where I was because assistance was on the way. I questioned what kind of assistance was needed, but the radio went silent. 10 minutes later, I received the same message again, delivered word for word, including my response, played back to me in my own voice. I tried switching channels, but the radio locked itself to the emergency band. As I continued down the trail, the forest grew quieter in a way that felt deliberate rather than natural. No no insects, no birds. The radio activated again and warned me not to proceed past the next marker. When I reached it, I realized the marker was facing the wrong direction, pointing deeper into the forest instead of toward the exit. The voice returned and instructed me to follow the sound of the radio to reach safety. That was when I noticed the transmission was no longer coming from the device in my hand. It was coming from ahead of me, echoing between the trees, repeating fragments of previous calls made by other hikers. Some were calm, some were crying. None of them ended. I turned back, only to find the trail behind me had narrowed into something that could not have supported regular foot traffic. The radio in my hand went silent, but the voice ahead continued, now speaking with urgency, telling me I was running out of time. The volume increased whenever I slowed down. I broke into a clearing just before dark and found a ranger station that was listed as decommissioned years ago. Inside, dozens of trail radios were stacked neatly on a table, all powered on, all broadcasting the same message on a loop. A sign above them read, "Do not answer unidentified calls." I left the forest without my radio. Official reports later claimed I never checked out the trail system. According to their records, my radio is still transmitting